You're listening to Dodge Movie Podcast. Your hosts are Christy and Mike Dodge, the founders of Dodge Media Productions. We produce films and podcasts, so this is a podcast about films. Join them as they share their passion for filmmaking.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to this episode of the Dodge Movie Podcast. It is episode 58, and we are going to be talking about It Happened One Night. The director is Frank Capra. It stars Clark Gable, Claudette Colbert, Walter Connolly, Roscoe Carnes, and Jameson Thomas.
Any relation to Stephen Colbert?
I meant to look that up because it's spelled the same.
That's extra credit for the listeners.
Yeah, there you go. Show notes. Where's my pen?
No, I wasn't kidding. Listeners can do it. Send it in to us.
Send it in. You do some
We're
heavy lifting.
crowdsourcing.
I've been studying all day.
Right.
It was written by Robert Riskin, and it was a Columbia Pictures production, which I didn't know this at the time, but they were considered Poverty Row. MGM and Warner Brothers were kind of like the big dogs in Hollywood, and they would lend out actors to Columbia because they couldn't afford, I guess, to have, like, on contract. Actors were like contracted with, a certain studio, and they would just do movies for that studio, but every once in a while they would lend them out to other studios. Little history there. The synopsis of this film is a renegade reporter trailing a young runaway heiress for a big story joins her on a bus heading from Florida to New York, and they end up stuck with each other when the bus leaves them behind at one of the stops. It's an interesting synopsis because
right, sounds a little stocky.
The bus does not leave them behind. She thought that the bus would wait for her, and the bus is like, no, we have to stay on a time schedule.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. That's from her point of view, she was left behind.
Right.
The bus driver says, no, you didn't show up.
Right.
You ditched me.
As I read it, I just went, wait a second. This movie made history because in 1934, when it came out, and it's possible that maybe it was 35 that this happened, but it made what they call a clean sweep. So it won the top 5 Academy Awards, which had never been done. It won Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, and Best Screenplay. That did not happen again for another 40 years when it happened to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And then later in 91, it happened with Silence of the Lambs. So that's amazing in Hollywood history that that's only happened 3 times.
And I would have said it wouldn't happen again, but Silence of the Lambs says it is possible.
Right.
But it seems highly unlikely.
I agree. I think people would call that boring if that were to happen today. They would just get annoyed that one film swept everything.
Is Second Story eligible this year?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, because we did not play in 3 theaters in Los Angeles.
Okay, I'll have to work on another film then.
Yep. So I want to take this time right now to kind of give a little bit of a history lesson. I'm going to try to keep it brief. And we talked about this with, I think it was either My Darling Clementine or High Noon. I mentioned that the film didn't have a letter rating like we're used to today. It was passed, or then the opposite could have been it didn't pass. And so I did a deep dive on Wiki, and I'll include that in the show notes, the link to the Wiki page, or you can just look up the Hays Code and find it yourself. But movies didn't have ratings even before this. Hollywood was getting a reputation for being immoral because stories were being portrayed that was causing some concern with conservatives. And then there was like a gambling scandal with baseball in the 20s. And then in 1921, an actor named Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle was accused of raping Virginia Rapp, and she later died. And so people were getting really concerned that Hollywood was this immoral place. And when was Prohibition? So this is kind of happening right around then too, right?
Yeah, that would have been about the same time, I think.
There was a lot in our culture and our society, a look on the demoralization kind of things, and so they felt like they needed to rein it in. So this Presbyterian elder named Will Hays kind of took it upon himself. He was the postmaster general under Harding, and he decided, I know what we need. We need a production code. We need a set of standards that people will abide by when they're making their movies. And so in 1925, he elected himself the president of the Motion Pictures Producers and Distributors of America. And in 1924, they recommended what they called the formula. And it was kind of like a bunch of do's and don'ts. And then people were, kind of abided by it, but kind of didn't. And so in 1927, he said, hey, you studio heads, why don't you guys create a group? And he asked the studio heads to create a bunch of don'ts and the be carefuls, they call it. And in the wiki article, they're listed. And it's kind of comical. It's none of this, none of that, no rape, no, like white slavery. I thought that was interesting. Wait, what about black slavery?
Oh, totally okay at that time.
Not okay. So they had this list of things, and it was really kind of on the honor code. You did it or you didn't. And there was really it was societal pressure to abide by it, but really no federal oversight or anything like that. So then now we come to the 30s, and there was a lot of people calling for censorship, which of course the studios and the movie makers were like, no, you can't censor us. That's not cool. And the Supreme Court agreed because somebody filed a lawsuit and they were like, nope, that's free speech. You can't do that. So then in 34, there was the creation of the Production Code Administration, or the PCA, and it required films to receive a certification. And most of the studios adopted that and abided by it. And then in 45, was the creation of the Motion Picture Administration of America, or the MPAA, which later became the MPA that we know today. And that's when they introduced the letter grades, like G for general audiences and PG for parental guidance and so on. And so it wasn't so much that your film was allowed to be shown or not, but it got that rating, and then audiences could make their own decision.
So those of you who are unfamiliar with that, I recommend a documentary that I think is called This Movie Is Not Yet Rated. And I'll give you the synopsis. Is the MPAA rating system is a load of hooey.
Well, and as I was doing this research, it always was a load of hooey. It was always conservative priests, Catholic priests, and politicians who were imposing their beliefs on what was good morals and not good morals. It wasn't like it was democratized at all. There's a lot of anti-Semitism that was allowed. Like there were things that are really bad that were still allowed while...
It's a good thing that government officials of questionable intelligence aren't overstepping their bounds nowadays.
Right.
Oh, wait.
So with that history in mind, Mike's right. That documentary, we should watch it again because it's been a while since we've seen it, although it would just make us mad.
Right.
But it is really fascinating to see. And I think that colored how audiences view it. Because if you think it's a G movie versus a PG movie versus an NC-17 movie, that does color your thoughts of it as a parent of young children.
Right. So it's predicated on this theory that the MPAA reviewers have watched the film, which is a thing that the parent hadn't done, and is able to give them the review. However, not only does that documentary show how ridiculous and just flat out stupid that system is, but in the era of the internet, it's incredibly obsolete, like buggy whip obsolete. And I don't actually agree with their ratings, but there's a website, Kids in Mind, that exists to tell the parents who used to look at the ratings more detail about what's in the film. So instead of saying it's good or it's bad, this website tells you, okay, there's a scene of people with their clothes off bathing, which was literally what they said about Brother Bear, and that's not true. You see two cartoon dudes with their shirts off in the river.
Right.
And that's not nudity. But my point is, people who are concerned can get access to that kind of information. Or, of course, the greatest website of all time, Does the Dog Die?, which tells you a critically important piece of information about deciding to go see a film. The reason I like those things better, even if I don't agree with Kids in Mind, and I do agree with Does the Dog Die?, is that it lets people make their own decision. It's not saying this is approved for people under the age of 13. Who knows? That's for the parent to make that decision, right? So that whole system is ridiculous, but that was an era, right, before that information was available to the average consumer.
Yeah, and if you guys know of any other websites like that, because like, for example, our youngest, I think, was turning 7 or 8, and he wanted to go see Transformers. It was the first Transformers that came out. So he invited his buddy, and his buddy was an only child, and didn't have a lot of familiarity with like a big action movie like that. And it was tough on him to be, and I felt bad. And we ended up, I felt bad for the poor guy. So I said, hey, let's go. Because I could just tell he was really uncomfortable and overwhelmed. Our youngest had been through that because he had been through movies like that with his brother. And so to him, Transformers was exciting and cool. So every parent needs to make that decision for their own kid. Can my kid handle this stuff? So I think anytime that there is almost like a listener-based or audience-based reviews, that works better than some quote-unquote governing body that has their definition of what is acceptable and not acceptable.
I'll give the counterexample from my own life. When I was 8 or 9, they showed Old Yeller at school, and it traumatized me.
Yeah.
And it was a G-rated film.
Right,
so
exactly.
I think that code is ridiculous. I think the Hays Code is actually probably less damaging because it's more silly in a sense. It tries not to make the value judgment that is inherent in those ratings. So in this documentary that we talked about, they talk about at a certain point in Hollywood, this was a big deal about whether your film was rated PG, PG-13, or R. That could affect its revenue, right? Who got to see it? So that was a big deal. And you were fighting with this group of people and whatever. But it's just, I think it's better to go to these other ratings that are based on the actual review of the film. And like you said, let people make the decision appropriately for their individual.
Right. Which I have seen on Facebook, different people. I try to post when we go see a movie, and that's kind of my call out. Hey, if you want to know what this movie's about, ask me. And a number of people have. Did you like it? Did you not like it? Was it sad? And I think we need to do that so that people get actual, accurate information about what's in the movie. All right, we'll get off our soapbox now. All right, Mike, kick us off. What's the pickup line for this film?
Hunger strike, eh?
And I purposely asked Mike to do it in that accent because as we were watching this movie, we got talking about that stereotypical old-timey, quick, announcer voice that is in so many movies of this era.
When a cold mama gets hot, boy, does she sizzle. Right? And I said...
Mike loves talking. You know how there's Talk Like a Pirate Day?
Oh, yeah.
We frequently have Talk Like a 30s announcer day at our house.
You can ask anybody who has worked with me that I love that voice. And maybe it's because I naturally have a higher voice and I like to speak a little quickly, but I totally liked that back in the day. It was great. And, it's funny.
It's an easy laugh, too. I mean, I think there's something comical really about it. So...
And what's interesting is what has kind of consciously replaced it, to me, is actually not as funny, even though Kent Brockman on The Simpsons is done to parody it, that booming announcer voice.
Oh, yeah.
I, for one, welcome our alien overlords.
Right.
And to me, that's less funny than I, for one, welcome our alien overlords.
Right. So Mike said, what is it? Where did it come from? Did they do it on purpose? What's the story? And usually you're the one that looks up stuff.
Yeah, actually, after you said the name, I realized I had looked this up in the past, but forgotten.
Okay. So I took it as my action item, as Mike would say, and I spent today learning. It's the Transatlantic or Mid-Atlantic accent, and it comes from an aristocratic America, kind of like back when, I associate it with the 30s, but it came from the British, it's highly influenced by the British people who came across. And so that's why they call it transatlantic, because it's not quite 100% British and it's not an American accent, but it's this kind of like blend.
I just realized who also is a fan of the transatlantic accent.
Who?
Amy Sherman-Palladino.
Oh, yeah.
Because Gilmore Girls talked so quickly, they didn't quite maybe have the pitch, but the rest of it was very much that.
It's interesting that you mentioned talk quickly because that is an aspect of it. But in the couple videos that I watched about this on YouTube, they did not mention the speed. They said that there's three distinct
features of it.
Yes,
tell me.
There's three distinct features of it. It's people often drop the R's when it occurs at the end of the word. So it's like mother, father.
Right. That's very much from
England. Yeah, exactly. English
non-rhotic
inspired
speech.
And then they have, it also has softer vowel sounds like dance instead of dance.
Oh, yeah. Krista Berg.
And there's sharp T's. And so he said in America, we often, when we see T's, especially if there's two T's, we say it more like a D. So like writer, water, but they hit that T sound. So it's water, writer.
Fascinating.
And they mentioned that Hollywood loved it because it was hard to place. So you couldn't tell, was somebody from Chicago, was somebody from Texas, was somebody from New England. They just had this transatlantic accent, and so they could be from anywhere.
Except that, to me, as a child hearing it, I always assumed it was from New York.
Right, exactly. I did too.
Isn't that fascinating, though? Much like now, everybody who wants to get into the news broadcast business adopts this like Midwestern Kansas kind of pronunciation, right?
Mm-hmm.
They call it, was it received pronunciation or something, I think? And it's also an affectation.
Yes, very much.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So a woman wrote a book, Edith Skinner wrote a book called Speak with Distinction, and she very much touted it and taught it. And so that became kind of like a Hollywood standard. But then it fell out of favor after World War II, and fewer teachers were teaching students how to pronunciate in this way. But it very much had an aristocratic feel. FDR spoke this way, Katharine Hepburn, Cary Grant, who...
Right, was in It Happened One Night.
Yeah, was he in... Which one? I'm getting the leading man of this and the leading man of... So there you have it. That is the little bit of history and the background for that fast speaking. And right away in this film, the delivery of a lot of the lines, especially from Clark Gable and her father, are in that intonation and that speech.
So my question would be if the speed was because I heard a lot of broadcasts of 1928 Chicago Cubs ball games. If announcers spoke quickly because they're trying to get more information to go, like I said, and then he makes runs the corner. Or, oh gosh, as I said that, I think horse racing.
Yeah. Well, I think not only that, but also I think any sports event, they're trying to keep up with the action. So, of course, they're talking faster.
Right. So not sloths, basically.
Not.
Yeah.
So what did you think of the acting, in addition to their speaking patterns, of Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert? Because let me interrupt you before you even get started. I had seen this film, but Mike hadn't. But I was so excited for him to see it because he loves rom-coms. And I said, I think this is probably like one of the first rom-coms.
Yeah, I did a little research on that. And it's hard really to pin down what is the first rom-com, but I think this qualifies. I think you can say this without much argument from anybody. I think if you look at the stereotypical kind of structure of a rom-com as defined by Billy Murnett, that this really definitely qualifies, right? Because both characters actually are transformed by their love for each other. And at the beginning of the film, we have the classic kind of meet cute where they're on a bus, right? And I think in both cases it works, right? Because Clark Gable is very suave as a leading man. He's handsome, although he's really thin. And maybe given the time, post-depression, maybe folks were still not getting quite as much.
They were jacked.
Yeah, well, there's the fact that he wasn't jacked, but you look at other people in other films, and they have, they're not chubby, but they have more meat on them. And I was struck by how thin he was in that, but he definitely is charming, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is extremely charming. And then Claudette Colbert plays this kind of ditzy heiress quite well. My joke at the beginning was it was kind of like the same setup as Overboard. And she has this great line she delivers, I come from a long line of stubborn idiots. And I think, in my opinion, she sold that very well. She sold the role of the stubborn idiot heiress.
I wouldn't, it's interesting you use the word ditzy. I wouldn't have qualified her as that because, and maybe these are two separate things, so she could be ditzy, but she very much knew what she wanted. I mean, The reason that she's on the bus is because her father was trying to tell her what to do. She said, I'm not going to do it. He slaps her and she jumps off the yacht and swims away.
Okay, maybe, I don't know. Maybe ditzy's wrong, privilege perhaps, but she doesn't realize when somebody's stealing her suitcase. She doesn't listen when people give her information, like the bus isn't going to wait for you.
Right.
She's not properly budgeting her money, so maybe that is all just privilege. She's never had to deal with these things.
I do think privilege is a better, because she, at the beginning, I remember I wrote in my notes, because she jumps off the yacht and she swims away, and then she shows up at the bus station and she has this beautiful outfit on. And I was just like, wait, where did she get the dry clothes and the beautiful outfit? And later we find out she hawked a watch to get kind of her clothing that she has.
Right.
And so I think she's actually quite resourceful because she has no money. She left all the money behind for freedom.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, maybe privileged and impulsive meet at foolish and not ditzy. Yeah. Okay, so perhaps that is not. She does, though. I think she could have a little flibberty gibbet in her, in that some of these impulsive decisions.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's cute because she kind of does act almost like a stubborn child, because when they're on the bus and she's annoyed by him and she keeps trying to almost like not sit with him, but then the alternatives, the seat partners that she ends up with are much worse than him. And so she begrudgingly and kind of like in a very, not stubborn brat, but just kind of like, oh, all right, I'm going to have to go sit by him.
So
Peter, I think his name is.
There's this character of King Wesley, which is her fiancé, and that actor, I think, was doing what he was directed to do, because he is kind of the Bellamy, where there's nothing wrong with him. He's just bleh, right? He's as bland as you can get, like plain yogurt. And then the dad is kind of over the top. Like that actor played her father, I think, a little bit over the top, but the newspaper editor is chewing the scenery like no one's business,
right.
Which maybe at the time, right, because it is a bit of a screwball comedy, it is fairly broadly drawn. And the actors in line at the auto camp for the shower, they were pretty broadly drawn. And I suspect those actors were capable of more subtlety, but it was just kind of the way it was, the style, the tone of the film.
So it was amazing to me because I felt like Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert had great chemistry. And I
agreed.
thought that their love story was totally believable.
Yep.
And so then afterwards, to find out that 5 actresses turned down this part, Claudette did not want to do this part. They had to double her salary and promise that the filming would only take 4 weeks because she had a vacation plan and she didn't want to miss it. And she told a friend on the last day, I just finished making the worst picture I've ever made. And then Clark Gable didn't want to do it. He was on loan from MGM. He was being punished because he had an affair with Joan Crawford.
That people found out about. It wasn't the affair. It was the fact that it was publicized. That's what they were mad about.
Right. And so he was overheard on set saying, all right, let's get this thing over with. So neither one of them wanted to be there. That's what great actors they are. We had no idea.
That is true. Also, I have to say credit to the editor. If while it was going, they didn't see the magic, that says to me that a lot happened in the edit. Also, I do wonder, though, if the way this film is in some sense supported by them wanting to get out of there. If that led to that fastness. And it's a film basically where they're fleeing, they're running. So
it's almost a road movie.
Oh, yeah, it is. And that energy. Well, speaking of a road movie, I did look it up, and in a modern vehicle, if you drove from Miami to New York, it would be 20 hours. I think in that bus, especially with stops, it's going to be a couple of days at least. That's a fairly long journey. I think that qualifies as a road film.
So were they on 2 separate buses? Because she misses the bus the one time.
Yeah, they get on a same line, same physical bus, I believe, different actor playing the driver.
That's right, because he bought her basically her second ticket. Yeah. And so then one of the most famous scenes of this movie that I will also link in the show notes is they have to stay at a hotel. And because there's the second bus breaks down. And so everyone on the bus is going to need a room at this motor inn. And they have to share a room. And it does have 2 twin beds. But he tells, and this is once again a very code thing, kind of.
Right.
He tells them that they're a married couple because that would be untoward for 2 single people to be even in the same room, even though there are 2 twin beds. And so in order for them to, because there's no bathroom, it's just like a one-room space, he draws a string and puts a blanket over it, and they call it the Walls of Jericho. And that allows them to disrobe.
So from the category of by the premise, by the bit,
Yeah.
why did he have a clothesline in his suitcase, and why were there hooks in the right place in the room?
So I think, because I watched it this time knowing what was happening, the line was already on the wall, and I wonder if, because suitcases were small, and you know how people wash
to hang
their
laundry.
Yeah, well, you know how people wash their underwear and their socks, kind of just so you don't have to pack as many. I know you can't do that, but I think that there was already a line there for people to do that and hang their stuff on to dry.
Okay. Yeah, that's more believable if the line was already there. I thought I saw him bring it out of his suitcase. But yeah,
maybe.
For laundry, I will mention that I did that in my college dorm room, and it also has the added benefit of humidifying a California dry desert air. You get quite a bit of humidity from those hanging t-shirts.
You enjoyed that?
Oh, yes, I did.
So as we're talking about by the premise, by the bit, what did you think of the writing? Did you feel like it made sense, that it was...
Yeah, I felt like for the tone of the film, the writing did make sense, right? There were some areas where it didn't quite make complete sense to me, right? There is the part where the bus driver drives off into the mud, and kind of to set up them being at one of the motor inn camps. Right. Another one is that there's a bit where she goes to take a shower and there's a long line. And if you do the math on when they said the bus was leaving, I don't think there was any chance that she could have gotten through there. And you would just turn around and go back to your room and do a PTSD bath, a la Dax Shepard, right? So some of that stuff, but the basic premise, right, of her running away made some degree of sense. And they open up, it was good writing to show us that she was ridiculous in that she was going on a hunger strike to get her way.
Right.
So very childish, but also shows a very stubborn person.
Well, and he I have in my notes, he says, "You ungrateful brat." So he calls her. So I think very much we've narrowed in on, I think she was kind of more of a stubborn brat than a flippity gibbet.
Right. They take her money away, so they put that pressure on her. And there's a time pressure. She has to get to New York by a certain time.
And he also has pressure too, because when we meet him, he's telling off his editor.
He basically gets fired.
And he's got it. But then once he realizes that she's the missing heiress, he sees an opportunity to write this story, because he's closer than anybody until other people start to figure out who she is. And other people try to take advantage of the fact that, because I thought there was the second seatmate that she had, not the guy that fell asleep on her,
Shapely.
but I thought he was trying to kind of almost like turn her in so he could get the reward money.
Right. And it was interesting how the character played by Clark Gable turns that guy around so he won't turn her in by basically making it seem like they're going to kill her. And he's now, and like, oh, you have kids and a wife and all of that. And there's also the character played by Alan Hale who tries to rip them off. So I thought that was probably fairly realistic at that time, right? What I didn't quite know, though, is whether it was reasonable for even a rich guy to mobilize the resources that he did. I mean, that was almost like the Lindbergh baby level of, but again, given the tone of the film, I thought it worked. It was fine.
And it almost has a planes, trains, and automobiles, because I'm thinking of the other famous scene from this movie is they're hitchhiking. And so he's standing out there with his thumb up and they're not getting any traction. And she's like, "Let me try." And that's where she lifts up her skirt and the first car that goes by kind of slams on his brakes. And so they end up in two separate buses and then now this guy's car. So it very much has that feeling of we have to do a bunch of different modes of transportation in order to get to New York.
I will say, because there's no horse so dead that I can't beat it, that I think every single time I've ever gotten a ride from someone, when they pull up, I pull my shorts up and show some leg.
Yes, I can verify that. I thought it was a funny scene when they were in the hotel room and there's some like investigators coming to the door to look because they're looking for this heiress. And so she's trying to hide herself. And so they do like this improv kind of being a married couple. and they just start basically fighting. It was so loud.
Right. She's crying and he's yelling at her, which basically the premise is it makes these other investigators uncomfortable
So they
at
just want to
seeing
leave.
this domestic strife.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought that was.
He's a clever character,
Mhm.
and it's almost like there maybe were other characters in cinema or even television that are based on this fast-talking, clever-thinking guy from the East Coast who likes to eat raw carrots.
Oh, yes. Yes. I forgot to mention that his portrayal inspired Bugs Bunny.
Yeah, and when you look at it from that perspective, you can totally
You
see
can
it.
totally see it. It's really fun.
Yeah.
And then there were two other characters that inspired Yosemite Sam and Roadrunner, I think.
No, Pepe Le Pew
Oh,
was
that's right. It was-
inspired by King Wesley, and then her father, I forget what his character's name is, but basically her father.
Yosemite Sam. Oh, I might have it.
Was Yosemite Sam's inspiration, which I didn't get as much because he didn't kind of have that Western darnation voice, but I could kind of see in the sense of just he's kind of mad.
I think her last name was Andrews in the film, so I think Walter Connolly played Alexander Andrews.
Yeah, that sounds right.
So you love to look at the cinematography, and we did pause a couple times to just talk about how gorgeous they lit her, and some of the bus scenes were pretty dark, she was lit really well on the bus, but when they were in the room, it was quite dark at times because they did turn off the light and they just didn't do the thing that I see a lot of movies do where it's like the moonlight lights them, or the
Right.
street light lights them.
Well, one thing I noticed was there is in one of the rooms there in the auto camp, as they call it.
Mm-hmm.
It's very dark, but she has gorgeous catch lights, which
Yes.
doesn't make any sense at all, like practically. And of course, they do the thing where it only rains at night because that's nice and dramatic. It shows up well on film, right? And I was very curious. I'd love to see how they did the actual shooting of that shot because the rain was substantially heavy.
Yeah, well, it's because they just use like a sprinkler.
Yeah, but that's
nowadays they have better like misters that you can go from a light mist to a medium rain to a heavy rain. But back then, I think it was just like a rain bird.
Right, yeah. It was the one that looks like the sunflower center part with the seeds, the giant one.
Yeah, because they couldn't use the
Exactly. But I just meant in volume of water.
Yeah, no.
That shot was long. They put a lot of water onto the soundstage.
Maybe just a PA on the roof, just, with his thumb over the opening of the hose or a fire hose or something.
Well, back then, they probably hired like a child to hang from their feet, like upside down with the hose. More rain, Jimmy.
Right. So for editing, we paused or at least commented a couple times. I noticed I really enjoyed when they were first, but there was this seat in the back that kind of, it wasn't one individual seat or two individual seats. It was like a bench. And so she sat there and he says to the driver, he goes, "That seat's meant for two, right?" And the driver's like, "I don't know." And he goes, "Well, it is today." And so he goes down. And so they're sitting quite close. And up until that point, they always shot that scene, I'd say like a medium wide kind of. It was like from their knees up. And then when he sits down with her, I noticed they went to a little bit of what I'd call, I guess, a tighter medium because now it's like waist up. And so, and the edges of the frame are pretty much just on the other side of both of their shoulders. So it makes us feel
more intimate.
Yeah, that tighter, that they're closer together and they're in a confined space kind of there in the back of the bus.
One of the things I wondered about that was related to production, about basically speeding principal photography, was how many long shots they had. So they didn't get a lot of coverage, it appeared. And one scene where that really was
only
apparent
had 28
to me,
days.
right, is in the breakfast at the auto camp. If you watch, there is at least one full minute, if not longer, where it is a continuous shot. And what makes that amazing is they're eating during it. So this means that there was no spit bucket.
Right.
So either they took one take or Clark and Claudette were like
Sick.
ill afterward. But I think they did one take, like, let's just get it done.
So it's funny you bring this up because this weekend while I was doing some stuff, I was listening to a fabulous podcast, you guys. It's called The Directors Guild. And if you enjoy our podcast, it's fabulous. They talk to the directors of many movies that are coming out right now. And I'm going to kick myself. I don't know if it was Paul Thomas Anderson, because I know I listened to that episode about the Macbeth movie that just came out, but it was somebody else, and it was a director, and he has tattooed on his forearm, always get the wide. And so
That's awesome.
That's so great. And so maybe Frank Capra was, just making sure, just at least get your wide shot.
Yeah, I can say there is benefit in just having them run through the entire scene with the wide. It's awesome.
Yeah. So maybe that's what was going on. There were a couple other edits we loved. Well, one didn't love it, but it was kind of fun to catch because you don't see one this blatant, but there was a bad cut.
Oh, yeah.
When he was undressing and he starts to he's taking his shirt off, which we'll talk about in a second because that was important. And he's taking his shoes off and he goes, and now I take my pants off. And he goes to grab his waist and she runs out. And so we see her kind of, I think she makes an exclamation of some point, oh, or squeals. And she runs towards her side of the room. And then the next scene, she's still standing over there. And then she runs. And it was just like, oh man, look at that was a bad edit.
That was by a few, more than a few, maybe by 10 frames
couple
or
Mississippis.
So. Yeah, they, whoopsie.
But one thing we love, there's an edit near, I think it's like 2/3 of the way through. And I can't remember, was it a police station? But we love it when one door closes and another one opens. And they did it so perfectly because they were both on
the right side of the screen.
Thank you.
And they pretty much framed the door jamb in the same spot. So as one closed, the editor cut to the other one opening or vice versa.
Yeah, it's such a fun shot.
It was kind of fun.
We got to try to do that.
Yeah, we should do that.
So let's go to costuming because there is kind of a fun little bit of trivia here. First of all, I loved early on in the movie, is that a fedora? I don't know men's hats. What was he wearing?
Neither do I, but I'm going to say
it's such a classic for that era.
I do know enough to know that they're not all fedoras. There are subtle distinctions, but I don't know what they are.
Okay, he's wearing a great hat. Let's just say that.
He's got a nice hat.
He looks fabulous in it too. And she's got this cute little black beret on. And so I just thought it was kind of funny early in the film when they meet. In a way, they're like so clothed that they're both even covering their head, or maybe it's that they're so put together early in the film. And then by the end of the film, I don't think either one of them are wearing their hat.
So it's interesting that that's what you caught on the costuming.
Oh, he sold the hat for gasoline, so he didn't have it.
Because my notes were from an entirely different perspective.
Yeah.
The first note is, I thought the bus driver's outfit looked a little too much Nazi for my tastes.
Well, what year are we? 30 now?
Yeah. And I felt like there was a cook at the first stop they come to that was announcing that breakfast was ready.
Right.
And this was a very dark complected fellow. And I felt like that looked like the cover of like the Gentle Ben's or what Uncle Ben's rice, whatever.
Yes.
It was those two things stuck out to me.
Very stereotypical, yeah.
Yeah, it was
a little made us a little uncomfortable.
Ago. Yeah. 100 years.
All right, on to nicer things.
Yeah.
We learned in the trivia of this film, there's the scene when he's undressing near the Walls of Jericho, and he's explaining to her how he undresses because he does it quickly or he says
every man has their own way of doing it, and it's really cleverly done because he is flirting with her, and if you look at the blocking, he's basically standing between her and where maybe she would
retreat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's starting to undress. And so it's basically a striptease. It's a male striptease.
Yeah. It's a great scene. I will link that one too in the show notes because it's available on YouTube.
And that dialogue right there in particular reminded me, and maybe Kevin Smith won't like me giving credit to Bruce Willis, but of Moonlighting.
Yes, I would agree.
The way he's doing that, especially the part where he's like, now most guys would go to, but I don't.
Right. I would totally agree. So he's taking off everything, and as they were doing it in the first couple shots, Capra was frustrated because when he would take his shirt off and his undershirt, he was having trouble getting through all of it quick enough to be in sync with his lines. And so Capra said, just don't wear your undershirt. Just take off your shirt and then just keep going to your shoes. And when audiences saw this, two things happened. Well, first of all, it was titillating to see Clark Gable bare-chested because, as we discussed, this was kind of a mid-code era, and that wasn't seen. But then it's thought that they saw a drop in undershirt sales because men were kind of like, well, if Clark Gable doesn't have to wear one, I don't have to wear one either.
Yes, which I think really set us back as a species. I think there's value in, as I put it, 2 layers of clothing in the bikini areas. So
Legend has it that a couple underwear manufacturers tried to sue Columbia also.
See, in the modern era, he would have turned around. His agent would have got him an endorsement from Fruit of the Loom.
Right, exactly. So anything else that stood out for you in this film?
Well, I have a lot of entries from the couldn't be made today.
Yes, as you mentioned too.
I mentioned a couple. Another one that kind of got to me was there's a line where he says, what she needs is a guy who'll take a sock at her once a day.
Jesus.
I made note of, wow, that's...
Ooh, Clark.
Yeah, that one's rough. And...
Ironically, we're recording this on like National Women's Day.
Right, yeah. This is her story. The dad slaps her again.
Oh, yeah.
Not so cool. She smokes like a chimney.
Yes, absolutely.
They all smoke, but in particular, and not that I necessarily support this idea that you can't have characters smoking cigarettes in films, but it is such a noticeable difference. Couldn't be made today, right?
Yeah.
There's also a part where he pretends to backhand her, and he gives her a spanking.
He was a little handsy, that Clark Gable.
Yeah, there was quite a bit
Well, doesn't he slap Vivian Leigh in... or maybe he just doesn't give a damn?
Yeah, I don't know. There was a lot of slapping of ladies back in the day. I don't have a list of them, but I did notice that they were a little free to smack her around.
Thank you for only adopting the way that they speak and not how they treated women from this era.
Yeah, I try not to support that part of it as well. But there's also this idea of this casual crime, right, that goes on. People are stealing suitcases and mugging you. That's not quite, maybe couldn't be made today, but I did notice that apparently 1934 travel was pretty dangerous.
Fast and loose with the laws.
Oh, wow. Fast and Furious. Maybe they need to go back in time and do one in 1934.
So I feel like you mentioned a couple, but any head trauma?
Mostly it's just her getting slapped.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because in doing research for this episode, I found a video I can also link. And they talked about that there is not a smoochie in this film.
Smoochy, smoochy, smoochy. I'm checking my notes, but I don't believe there's only an almost smoochy at 58 minutes, 20 seconds.
There's an almost smoochie. And this man and woman who were in the video talking, they were suggesting that actually intensified the titillation. And that's one of the things that they didn't put in because of the code. Although I can't believe that a boyfriend girlfriend couldn't kiss, but I guess I'm glad I wasn't born in the code era.
I'm forgetting where it was actually set up, but if they were blocked in, if they did that scene inside the room at the auto camp, there might have been the implication that more was going on.
Yeah, you're right.
Well, boom chicka wow wow.
And so they were just talking about how the two of them, that's what made this film so enjoyable, is it wasn't just like a quick, they jump in bed and they're a couple. It was this, like you said, the kind of the flirtation from Moonlighting, where it's the sexual tension of
will they, won't they?
Will they, won't they? And do they like each other or don't they like each other? Are they going to get together? Which I thought, when I heard that, very much reminded me of kind of how you handled Second Story, because in 10 minutes, you're not going to madly fall in love and kiss a guy. So we wanted the promise of that this could be at least a friendship, maybe, but maybe even more. Maybe Mary and Jock would get together, and that's kind of what they did here with...
Right. So when Jock leans in to whisper in Mary's ear that last line, I'm getting myself. It's like, let's say I did it because of the almost kissed and it happened one night. That'll sound better.
All right, how about there's a lot of driving in this film, so
Oh, there is. And first
buckle
and
up,
foremost,
everybody.
we see a 1932 yellow coach ZCN 670, and that is the bus. And it is a distinctive looking bus. Looked it up. It apparently wasn't very popular. This film is where most of the hits for that bus come from.
Oh, wow.
So you'll notice it has an external horn, and we get to hear that a few times. Oh, boy, that was loud in the mix. And I also notice, as part of the driving review, that the bus driver turns around to look at everyone singing when the passengers break out into song.
Oh, yeah, what were they singing?
The Flying Trapeze.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And that's a song that I only know from my youth. I don't know whether we sang it in school or if it was like Looney Tunes.
I played it on my flute, so I bet you played it on your clarinet.
Yeah, I probably did. and I will notice that I believe it was the turning around to watch the performance that led to them steering into the muddy ditch.
I think you're right.
Except that based on the way the shot was done, it looks like he made like a hard right to get into the muddy ditch, and I'm not sure. But maybe he was holding the wheel as he turned to the right. Who knows? So that's not particularly good. You'll notice there's a Model T, and so Alan Hale's character picks them up and he attempts to rob them or whatever. And then Clark Gable steals the Model T. We just pass over that grand larceny, but steam is coming out of the radiator cap the entire time. So by the time the radiator is steaming, you're in deep trouble, and you're going to run out of water, and it will seize the engine. So that was not particularly accurate. I have to give a point there. And he panic stops the Model T in order to pick her up. And I have it from someone who actually owned one, that if you do that kind of screeching panic stop, it wears the drums smooth, and then the brakes don't work anymore. You actually literally have to replace the drums to get them to work anymore, which I'm guessing that the writer probably was not aware, unless you had actually had a Model T and done that.
Robert Riskin did not.
Not exactly a driving review, but I did love the line, if you change your mind, your car is waiting at the back gate. So it's always good to have a getaway car idling someplace. And I have to say, special note, this is the only film I can think of that has an autogyro in it.
What is that?
It's this half helicopter, half plane thing. And King Wesley flies one to his own wedding, which, if I remember correctly, I think that actor flew the dang thing, because there is a scene where the thing is obviously still operational on the ground, and he puts on a top hat because, of course, if you're going to stand up right beneath a giant rotor, you want your head to be taller. It was amazing that they threw that in. It didn't make a lick of sense, but it was awesome to see an autogyro on film.
There you go. Should we go to the numbers?
Let's go to the numbers.
All right. This 1934 film had a budget of $325,000, and it did quite well despite only getting mediocre reviews early on. It gained in popularity as people, word of mouth. People told their friends, go see this movie. It brought in $2.5 million worldwide. So I would say that's a success. Good job, Frank Capra.
Mm-hmm.
It got a 8.1 on IMDb and we know that's good because they rate low. Rotten Tomatoes critics gave it a 99% and audiences gave it a 93%. So this one definitely is up there in the top movies, the must-see movies. It's an hour and 45 minutes. Like I said, it passed the ratings board. It's a rom-com. We paused this movie 4 times. We watched the pickup line twice. I think the third time we were talking about lighting because we love when the leading ladies get gorgeous lighting.
Mm-hmm.
And the fourth time to talk about the Bugs Bunny reference that I had read in the trivia to let you know that. So let's see. Gosh, at 55 minutes, I think we've talked enough about It Happened One Night.
We have.
But join us next week when we're going to be talking about one of our favorites, Only Angels Have Wings, to round out this month of Christie's Classics. And leave thoughts, reviews, follow us on all our social medias, Dodge Media Productions. Let us know if you have any questions, and never forget,
Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.
Thanks for listening to Dodge Movie Podcast with Christy and Mike Dodge of Dodge Media Productions. To find out more about this podcast and what we do, go to dodgemediaproductions.com. Subscribe, share, leave a comment, and tell us what we should watch next. Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.